Okay. My name is Shonda Feather, and that's Sam Henry Ocean, Nora David Adam. Sorry, phonetics. S-H-O-N-D-A. Feather is my last name, F-E-A-T-H-E-R. It was 1992, and I was working at Hollywood Video. And that was the summer that every sequel known to man was coming out. It was Aliens, Terminator, Lethal Weapon. They were all coming out that summer. I was closing that night, and I walked up to the counter, and as I was walking up, I saw this guy, but I really only saw like shoulders up. So I kind of snuck around to the kids section and to get a better view of what was going on, and saw that he was on his knees and he had a cast on each leg. He was looking for Lethal Weapon 1 and 2 because number 3 was coming out in the theater that year. And I knew that we didn't have it. He then started to crawl back out, said thank you, started to crawl back out the door, would not let me hold the door for him. About a couple minutes later, I heard a honk, and I went back out, and he was just like, I am so bored, as you can tell. I'm all casted up. I don't know what you can do. I'm just bored. I need a movie. So I was like, give me your Cub Food card. It was Cub Food at the time, before it was Winco. And I said, I'm going to go over and get this movie for you because there's no way you are going to be crawling halfway through their store. And he was so thankful. He left, and it was about another few months that I heard back from him. And he had come in and left a rose for me and said, thank you for your help, Steve. So he came in, and this time I didn't recognize him because he was standing up and the casts were off his legs. And it took me a second to realize who he was. And here's this 6'2" guy who was much shorter at the time that I first saw him. And so we walked the wall, he picked a couple of movies, and again, he left. And I get a call the next day, he's getting ready to return these movies, but he wants to know if I'd like to go out for a cup of coffee. And I said, sure, no big deal, love a cup. So he's like, all right, let's go ahead and meet for coffee. He's like, by the way, how old are you? And I was like, I'm 21. And I had turned 21 by that time. And I said, I'm 21. And there's complete silence on the other end of the phone. I'm like, are you there? And he's like, yeah. I said, I thought you were older than that. He said, not that you look older, he said, but you act and you carry yourself in a much older way. And I said, okay. I said, how old are you? And I was pretty good about figuring out somebody's age. And I kind of pegged him at 35. And he's like, well, I just turned 43. And I was like, okay, didn't faze me at all. I had dated older guys before, so it didn't really faze me. But it took him probably a few months before we actually first went out for that first cup of coffee. And we eventually did, and that's where the story took off. And we spent a wonderful 25 years together. We were, just a couple that was so in love. And trying not to cry here. We had a wonderful life. We spent a lot of time doing community events, from the Doggy Dash to the Walk for the Animals. We visited the Keller multiple times a year, as well as the Schnitz. A lot of the ushers knew us by name because we were just regulars out there. We enjoyed all that the community had to offer us. And he ended up getting brain cancer, and I lost him on January 5th of 2017. And I can say that I won the lottery with that man. He always told me he didn't need Valentine's Day to tell me how much he loved me. And he told me that every day. He always had to touch me, always hugged me. In the car, he always had a hand on my leg. He would send me flowers like every month. He had a florist that knew him by name. And they would regularly send me flowers to work. All the ladies hated me. All the guys were like, oh my gosh. They were kind of like worried that their wives were gonna expect the same thing. But he just was so in love with me, and I with him. He would always write me notes and put them in my lunch boxes, and he was just that type of guy.
You wait a couple months after that phone call to actually having
that first date, just because he was so petrified. He was worried about the age difference. We were 22 years apart, and he was really worried about that. He was concerned about what my mother would think, and my mother didn't have a problem with it. But there was obviously a stigma with his friends and things like that. So he was just a bit worried, and I kind of put those worries to rest, and it didn't affect our relationship at all. There were a few times I teased him, like I had pneumonia one year, and he carried me into the doctor's office, and the nurse thought it was so cute that her dad was carrying his daughter into the doctor's office. We shocked her when we kissed. So, we did little things like that, but it didn't take long. I became gray at 38, and I had more gray hair than him. So even though we were 22 years apart, so yeah.
So during that time, were you actively pursuing him, or was it the?
We weren't actively pursuing each other. It just kind of happened. He was actually, the reason he had the cast on each leg was he was working with Oregon DEA while he had retired from his chief of police job in Monterey County, California. He came up here because he loved the area up here, and he started working in concert with the Oregon DEA and FBI, and they were doing drug busts up and down the Oregon coast. And a lot of those areas were heavily guarded on the ground, so my husband taught them how to paratroop in. And on one of those cases, they paratrooped in at night for this drug bust, and he landed on a picnic table and tore both Achilles tendons, and that's the reason he was double casted with the toes down. He opted not for the surgery. He opted to just heal on his own, and it was a good 6 months in casts, but eventually healed.
Who said "I love you" first?
Oh my goodness. I would have to say I think I said "I love you" first, but he said it right back. So he was just a softie. He was soft-hearted. He was very old-fashioned. Always opened the car doors. Always opened every door for me. Always, made sure I got to order food first, and he always put me first. He was always thinking of me over himself. He was selfless. He always told me that he was so lucky to have me as his wife, and I have to flip that around and say how lucky I was to have a husband like that. He was just the best person that I knew. He was my best friend, and I miss him terribly. Anything to be able to hug him again, to be able to hear his voice. That's one of the things with brain cancer, is it completely changes you. If you have to get cancer, try and get anything but brain, because you lose your speech. He didn't lose his memory. He always knew who I was, but it completely changes you. So I would just have wanted to have him say "I love you" one more time. And it was the last 3 months of his life that he could nod and smile, but that was about it. And I just wish I could have heard him say "I love you" one more time.
What's next for you?
I'm just living day to day, and it's still a struggle to get through daily life without the person you've spent the last 25 years with. But I have a sister who's helping me get through the day-to-day struggle, and I'm slowly getting over the insomnia that I've had since he passed. That's one of the things that I think is the worst. But it's one of the things that I did right after was to continue to keep busy, because I didn't want to revert and fall back into a depression or anything like that. So I just kind of put myself out there and kept busy with my job, and I had a lot of friends that were there for me, and they still are. So it's just it's still a struggle, I would say, to wake up every day, but I do, and I just look forward to making him proud every day for everything that I do.
Anything else you'd like to add?
Trying to think.
When did you know he was the one?
Oh gosh. I would say I knew he was the one on our first date. It wasn't like a huge special place. I had closed that night, and at Hollywood Video we closed at midnight on the weekday and 2 a.m. on the weekend. And it was a weekend, so I was closing at 2 a.m. So there really wasn't anything open but Denny's. So we, he called and he said, if I'm not there, then I am on a job. I got a call from, you know, DEA or FBI, and we're on a job. But if I'm there, I'll be there. And 2 o'clock rolls around, and I'm looking, and I had another employee with me, and I told him to go ahead and go. And I was going to wait a few more minutes. And as we opened the door, a dollar bill fell down. And I was like, who put a dollar bill in the door? So I picked it up, and it said, don't leave. I'm next door getting some bonbons. I'll be right there. I was like, okay. So I waited, and he came right back up. And we went to the Oregon Pier and just stood out on the pier for a little bit. And it was cold. I remember it was cold, and I was shivering because I'm naturally cold. And he put his arms around me to kind of warm me up. And I felt something, and I was like, what is that in your waistband? And he's like, oh, that's a gun. And he was so used to carrying it as a police chief that it was just one of those things that he had on his person. And anyway, so we had breakfast at Denny's at like 3 a.m. that morning, and that was our first date.